Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM's POTUS.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM for Friday, November 1st. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. We've got 4 days to go. Early voting ends today in the battleground states of Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. And Tom, I want to talk about the polls, but we have to start with what Donald Trump said last night in an appearance with Tucker Carlson in Glendale, Arizona. Here's some of what he said.
And I don't blame him for sticking with his daughter, but his daughter is a very dumb individual, very dumb. She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person. And I used to I'd have meetings with a lot of people, and she always wanted to go to war with people. So whether it's her, whether it's Dick, I was surprised a little bit with Dick Cheney. I didn't know him at all. I only had essentially the 1 or 2 phone calls, and it was only a call saying, thank you very much for doing that for Scooter Libby. That was nice.
So he's referring there to the fact that he pardoned Scooter Libby, who was a friend of Dick Cheney's in the Bush administration. But Tom, what do you make of it? This is sort of the quote of the day. This is what people are talking about.
So we get to start the show with a rant by me about the media and their dishonesty. This is new. I like this. So listen, drives me crazy. Okay. I mean, Trump is making the argument that plenty of other people have made over the past decade or so, that Liz Cheney's a war hawk, a chicken hawk, and these are keyboard warriors, folks that sit in the comfort of their own homes in Washington, D.C. or whatever, and send our sons and daughters off to war. That's what Trump was saying. And yet it gets twisted into this. Donald Trump wants Liz Cheney, put in front of a firing squad and killed. He's, amping up his violent rhetoric and all this. It's preposterous. I mean, 2 days ago, the media was arguing, some in the media were arguing in favor of, Joe Biden didn't say Trump's supporters were garbage. There was an apostrophe there. It's not clearly what he meant. We want to give him the benefit of the doubt. Nobody will give him any grace. And now here they are. And this comes on the back of them taking another Trump quote when he was talking about migrant crime, right? Saying he'd protect women. We talked about this yesterday, whether they like it or not. And Kamala Harris used that and ripped it out of context and sort of shoehorned it into the abortion issue. And it got reported dutifully by the media. He says plenty of outrageous things. You can report on him honestly and fairly and still get your fill of he's Orange Man bad and all that. You don't have to take his words and completely rip them out of context and portray them in the worst possible light. There's no wonder that people are, myself included, get so infuriated with the media and the way that they sort of twist this guy's words. He was making a very, I think, legitimate argument that has been made plenty of other times. He made it in his own Trumpian way. And yet it comes out, that he wants Liz Cheney dead. He wants her in front of a firing squad tomorrow, and he wants nine people to hoist their guns and shoot her dead. It's ridiculous.
Carl, let me just give you Liz Cheney's response, and then I want you to weigh in. Liz Cheney said, quote, "This is how dictators destroy free nations. They threaten those who speak against them with death. We cannot entrust our country and our freedom to a petty, vindictive, cruel, unstable man who wants to be a tyrant."
Yeah, I saw that quote. The Washington Post had that quote in their story before they actually had Trump's quote. This morning I was writing my morning newsletter. My wife Sharon watches Morning Joe, and she said, "Did you hear the latest? Trump called for Liz Cheney to be shot." And I thought to myself, I sensed that probably didn't happen. So I went and looked it up. But it took me a while to find the quote because first I came across the Drudge Report. Trump calls for Cheney's execution. And then I found the Harris campaign's press release. Trump suggests Republican Liz Cheney should face a firing squad. So I've got to, I hate to do this, but I've got to completely agree with Tom about the media's performance here. It's shameful and it's dishonest. However, the modern presidency is a communications job. When Trump is so frequently parodied, that's partly his fault. He didn't have to say that thing about 9 guns trained on her face. That's a very strange way of speaking. Are
you victim blaming, Carl? He's asking for it.
And there's something, okay, in a more substantive way. Liz Cheney never sent troops anywhere. I mean, he's simply wrong about that. And, the United States Congress has voted overwhelmingly to send arms to Ukraine, not American soldiers. Both parties have done this. I mean, I don't really know what he's talking about. And
he's talking about the Iraq
Carl,
War.
you were so you ruined it. You agreed with me, and then you went out there and
Dick Cheney was vice president. He wasn't even the president. Liz Cheney was not even in Congress yet. I'm sorry. This is a communications job. You have to communicate properly. Yes, I am victim blaming because a lot of this is Trump's fault. That he can't speak more precisely, more carefully, more honestly.
Well, that's fine. But are you really arguing that Liz Cheney has not argued to send troops over?
Yeah, well, he said she sent them there, Tom. She didn't send them there. We should stick to facts on our show. All right. We shouldn't be like
she never voted to send. She never voted to send troops anywhere. She's never argued.
I assume her voting record is probably the same as the Speaker of the House. I notice Trump isn't attacking him.
Well, let me just, I want to move on, but I just want to give a quick shout out to C-SPAN because, I go to find these bites and to play them on our show. I found all the sort of networks had so heavily edited the piece that I couldn't use it. I had to go to C-SPAN, take the actual thing and then pull. There were no edits in what I played for the audience, and try to get sort of something that would give us a true sense of what he said. I hope we fairly represented it. I'm sure I'll hear if people think we didn't. But
3 cheers for C-SPAN.
Yeah, exactly. So Tom, let's talk about polling. We've got new polls, including this Marist poll.
Is that all we get to rant about the media? That's it? It's like 2 minutes. I mean, geez, Andy.
I think we did okay there, Tom.
Let's move on. Okay. All right. No, fair enough.
Tom, we've got new polling, including the Marist poll, which shows Harris leading in the blue wall states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. What do you make the latest numbers and anything new in the averages?
Well, the averages are roughly where they were before, but you're right. I mean, the good news, if you're a Harris supporter, the good news is Marist came out and with Harris leading by 2, 2, and 3 in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And there was another poll, Detroit Free Press had Harris +3 in Michigan. And then there were some other polls, USA Today Suffolk had a tie in Pennsylvania. Rasmussen has Trump up 2 in Pennsylvania, and 3 polls in Nevada, 2 of which showed Trump ahead, one which had Harris ahead. I mean, so it was a I would say mixed bag, but a little bit more in favor of Harris than in favor of Trump. Our national average ticked down. Trump was ahead 0.5 point. Now he's up 0.3 of a point. But in the battlegrounds, he was up 0.9 of a point. Now he's up 1.1. So, he got a little movement in Nevada, but he lost a little bit of ground in Michigan. And he's still got a half a lead in Pennsylvania. And that's the place, again, you look at these states. We talked about this the other day. Georgia and Arizona are kind of getting away from Kamala Harris a little bit. And it's coming down to the blue wall states. If she wins those, she wins 270, 268. And right now, she looks to be winning both 2 out of the 3. Pennsylvania is the sort of rough spot. And I mean, the polls there honestly couldn't be tighter. Trump's ahead in most of the polls, but it's 2 points, 1 point tied. So very, very close still.
Going into the last weekend, Andy and Tom, I mean, we can say this. This thing's a dead heat. Right?
It is a dead heat.
Yeah.
If you believe the polls. If you believe the polls are undercounting Trump's support as they did in 2016 or 2020, you think he's ahead by a small margin in most of these states, and then he'll probably end up winning them all. Now, Harris supporters actually, and again, I follow Harris supporters closely, Simon Rosenberg and Tom Bonier and all those guys, and they are convinced that Kamala Harris is going to win all of these states by 2 to 3 points. They think the polling is overstating Trump support by a good, 2 or 3 points, and that they're going to be in good shape based on ground game, based on early vote, et cetera. So we'll see who's right.
We'll see who's right. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Waldworth, and I'm talking to Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to let Tom rant a little bit more, only this time it'll be about his hometown of Chicago. So don't go away, but we'll be back after this.
Online at RealClearPolitics.com.
On air on Sirius XM Channel 124.
Real Clear Politics is on POTUS. Informing you on the important issues of the day.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Waldworth, and I've got with me Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And Tom, Chicago, your mayor is in the spotlight. Brandon Johnson has a problem with the Jewish community. This follows this shooting of a Jewish man who was walking to a synagogue, and then the shooter fired at the responding officers. This happened this weekend, and on Thursday morning, the resignation of the new president of the Chicago Board of Education. Sounds like a mess. What's going on in your hometown?
It is a mess, but before we get to my second rant of the hour, we should, for those of you, I want to reiterate next Tuesday, we're going to be doing a live stream on Real Clear Politics for election night. And so we hope you tune in. We're looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And there's going to be cameras, Tom.
Yeah,
so
no,
not just audio.
Live streaming on the Real Clear Politics website.
I'm going to have to get a haircut.
Before.
You're going to have to wear a tie. I know you don't like doing that, Tom.
I'm advertising it as, we're not going to try and replicate what the TV networks do. But we are, I'm selling it as like Manning Cast, right? We're going to talk about the election returns, and it should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. Anyway.
Yeah,
okay.
no, I'm
as
looking
long as
forward
I get
to
to be Peyton and Tom's Eli, I can live with that.
Well, and I should say there'll be the three of us there. Sean Trendy will be there, and we will be bringing in some of our favorite people who've been on the show for the last couple months.
That's right. Phil Wegman,
so,
Susan Crabtree. I mean, we're going to have an all-star cast. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait.
Yeah. So anyway,
okay.
That's election night, which seems a million miles away right now. Let's talk about Chicago.
Yeah. So Brandon Johnson, I mean, you mentioned there was this horrible shooting, and he released a statement, and which was devoid of any mention that this was a
hate crime.
Hate crime, right? Exactly. That the victim was Jewish, which was in bad form, I think. But he's had this ongoing struggles. I mean, it's gotten really bad. So he had his handpicked head of the Chicago School Board. He wanted him to basically take on this $300 million high interest loan so he could give the teachers unions, from whence he came, right? They're his biggest supporter, pension raises and booster pensions and all that stuff. And he said no. So he fired him. And then the entire school board resigned. And then his new handpicked guy turns out to be a 9/11 truther and an anti-Semite.
This is Reverend Mitchell McKenna Johnson.
Yeah, exactly. This guy, Mitchell Johnson. Yeah. And so now he's got, I mean, the last count,
he's resigned,
40,
right?
He's resigned because over more than 40 of the 50 city councilmen called for his resignation. The governor called for his resignation. On top of that, you've got, he put forward the city budget where he's asking for another $300 million of property tax increase, which he vowed and promised repeatedly throughout the campaign that he was the only one who was going to get all this stuff done without raising property taxes. And, it's been too long. People have been, raising money off the backs of Chicagoans through property tax increase. And then he turns around and does the same thing and just kind of brushes it off. On top of that, he has the most sort of arrogant, condescending, holier than thou demeanor of any mayor we've had in recent memory, maybe ever. He is constantly these press conferences. He's alienated tons of people. He's alienated the press. He tells people, don't ever interrupt me again. Don't you call my wife by her name. Call her by the, first lady. I mean, he is the most thin-skinned guy. And on top of that, he constantly, he'll take any criticism and shove it through a racial lens and say, Chicago's never seen anyone like me because I'm a black man raising black kids on the west side of Chicago, yada, yada, yada. And the upshot is
he's not, by the way, the first black mayor of Chicago.
Right.
No. And in fact, the mayor who preceded him was black and female and gay. So, if we're checking boxes, he's missing a couple.
He's the guy who, when asked why they should take a high risk bond and risk the city's finances to give the teachers a raise, he said that question showed that you were sympathetic to the Confederacy.
I know.
In the Civil War. He actually said that. Yeah. He's
been about as bad as you can imagine. And the results are exactly what you'd expect. His approval rating is 14%. And that is, I think Lori Lightfoot at one point was like 27%. Rahm Emanuel, his approval rating got down after the Laquan McDonald shooting. His approval rating dropped fairly precipitously, but this guy is already down to like friends and family level. I mean, there's hardly anyone in the city who thinks he's doing a good job, and he's alienated all of his allies. I mean, it's a real mess. And, I tweet stuff about Chicago because I'm here. And so people who follow me on X will know. And, the immediate response is that people say, you get what you vote for. Congratulations. Couldn't be going, right. It's like, there's not a lot of sympathy outside of Chicago for what's going on in Chicago because, in fact, Chicagoans did vote for this. And now they're kind of, reaping what they've sown.
Tom, that's a fair criticism. A lot of this was known about Brandon Johnson before he ran.
People knew he was a creature of the teachers.
They did. Yeah. And, Paul Vallis was the former schools chief and a guy who's sort of more of a centrist Democrat. And, he put up a good fight, and it would be, I think we'd be in a different situation if he had won the mayorship. But look, we are where we are. The question is, where do we go now? I had Marianne Ahern, who's a political reporter for NBC5 here in Chicago, on the show a couple of weeks ago when all this school board stuff was just breaking. And she said, there's no mechanism for recalling a mayor. They would have to pass that, I think, through the state legislature. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So we're kind of stuck with him, even though I think
it's only 3 more years, Tom.
Honestly, if a recall was on the ballot in 4 days, he'd be recalled faster than you could,
Faster than Pennsylvania can count votes.
Right. Yeah.
Way faster than that.
Right. Well, Carl, I want to talk because you had this piece on the front of RCP today. It's on lawfare against energy producers. I highly commend this piece to people. It's really a deep dive into this topic, and Carl's done a masterful job. It's not an issue that's getting a lot of attention on the campaign trail, but you say that it will be getting more attention soon. So what should our listeners know?
Well, they've used plaintiffs' lawyers in Democratic states because these are Democratic attorneys general, and with some private lawyers who've sued energy companies in the past, have gone after the oil companies and natural gas companies and even some utilities for global warming. And they've used the tobacco litigation playbook. And they've said and it's word for word what was said. And this is deliberate, and they don't hide it because they had a symposium and they said, in 2012, we're going to use the tobacco logic against the oil companies. And the idea there was the tobacco industry had lied about the effects of cigarettes on, that causes lung cancer, emphysema, heart disease, strokes, that they had paid for junk science. And they're saying that the oil companies did something similar. What's different about it, and there's 32 lawsuits now, including the state of California, and they're suing these oil companies. And there's a couple of problems with it, though. One is that if they're successful, it will increase everybody's energy costs in the country quite significantly.
Much like it did to cigarette costs, for that matter.
That's right. But yeah, I was in Kent Island where Andy lives the other day, and a woman walked in a gas station, ordered a pack of cigarettes. It was $14. I just startled me.
$14 for a pack of cigarettes, really?
Well, the Maryland tax, the state of Maryland tax is $5, Tom.
Wow.
$5. But nobody cares about these smokers. And if they do care about them, they say, well, we're saving their lives because smoking cut in half and then cut in half again. But oil's different. We can't live without this energy. There's nothing to replace it. And this idea that the oil companies lied seems it's a weaker argument because, the whole conversation, national conversation for 3 decades has been dominated by the other side. So it's not like everybody was unaware that oil causes pollution. But the Supreme Court's going to hear one of these cases. They're not going away. They'll start coming to fruition in 2025. And we talk about, cats and dogs being eaten in Ohio and other stuff. But this hasn't even come up in the campaign, and it's a huge issue.
Well, I highly commend the article to people. You can find it on Real Clear Politics today. Don't go away. When we come back, I'm going to talk to Henry Olsen about early voting. And then later in the program, Carl is going to get in the head of Harris voters with Peter Zane from Real Clear Investigations. We'll be right back after this.
It's real, it's clear, and it's on POTUS.
It's Real Clear Politics.
Sirius XM 124.
Not bound by any left-right constructs.
Real Clear Politics. Open to a wide political spectrum.
This is POTUS on Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and my next guest is Henry Olsen. He is Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and host of Beyond the Polls podcast. Henry, let's talk about the early voting. That's what we talked to you about a week ago. We got 65 million votes cast already. What does it tell you?
Well, you don't want to read too much into it. But what you see pretty consistently is that Republicans are turning out equal or higher turnout to Democrats, that African Americans are turning out at lower percentages than they have historically. And lots of them are voting, but they are a smaller share of the early vote electorate in Georgia and North Carolina than they were 2 and 4 years ago. And that in-person early voting is very popular, that Wisconsin, which offers both no excuse absentees and in-person voting, yesterday about 100,000 people voted in person and about 35,000 sent in their mail ballots. It's now a relation of 800,000 to 550,000, and it'll go up today, which is to say that the Democrats' preferred method is less popular than it used to be, and the Republicans' preferred method is more. Infer from that what you want.
So let's dive into a couple states. The NBC News Decision Desk, they put out this analysis, state voter data. This is as of October 30th. They said there was an influx of new female Democratic voters in Pennsylvania, but new male voters in Republican voters in Arizona. These are two of the most important swing states, of course. Does that tell us anything? The idea that these new voters are breaking down by gender in these two important states?
Yeah, I would not read too much into that because, first of all, new voters, it kind of depends how you're defining it. Are you talking about somebody who moved to the state? Are you talking about people between 18 and 24? The story that the Democrats are telling is, yes, there's all these other things, but look at the large number of young women who are voting. And the fact is, you take a look at the aggregate data and the share of females in the Georgia early vote is no higher overall than it was 2 years ago. So maybe it's shifting from older women to younger women, or maybe it's just noise and you shouldn't read too much into it. I think the overall story is that so far Republicans are embracing in-person early voting. So far, African Americans are turning out at lower rates than they have historically. And the best evidence we have is it's not being offset by overages in over expectations in most areas that would have white Democrats. Some exceptions, but it seems to be a better story for Republicans. But of course, all it may mean is that Democrats will vote on Election Day instead of early. You just don't want to say anything other than what is literally in front of you, which is it's better early voting news than Republicans are used to hearing.
Right. And what about in Nevada? Because Nevada, I always say Nevada and I always get corrected. It's Nevada. But John Ralston, who is the sort of guru that we all follow when it comes to this stuff, he said the other day that the final GOP lead in early voting, which ends today, if it was over 25,000, it would be hard, in his view, for the Democrats to make up the difference on election day. And that's always the question: is on election day, did the Republicans come out the way they used to and sort of overperform, or have we just shifted these votes where the early voting is cannibalizing the day of voting? But he says his number was 25,000. The current GOP lead out there, as I understand, is 47,300. Now, of course, Democrats could vote. There are a lot of early voters could show up today. Who knows? But does that tell you anything? And if it's true, does that mean Nevada is slipped away from the Democrats?
It has not slipped away, but, I don't know how to say it in this politically correct age. Somebody is singing of a particular size wearing Viking helmets. As Ralston says on his blog, the Republicans have not led in early voting this late since before 2008. 947,000 votes have been cast. There's going to be about 1.4 million cast total. In other words, 70% of the vote is in. Democrats have to win the remaining vote by much more than the Republicans are leaning. In-person early voting ends today, but mail early voting can continue to come in. And traditionally, apparently, Democrat mail comes in late. Although in the past, it has come in less late than it may come in this time. Nevada is probably the single best state for early voting news for Republicans, but it still does not mean you say it's over. There's a lot of people who are independents in Nevada. If they break 5 to 10 points in favor of the Democrats, a lot of this early voting lead will be swept aside. It's probably the best indicative state for a Republican win, but it is not at all anything that would let me do more than say, maybe I'll give them a slight edge if I'm on a betting market today.
So on election eve, Real Clear, we're going to be streaming live from our site, doing our thing. What will you be watching for election eve, and what should we be watching for election eve?
So the first thing to look for is the early vote in Georgia. By law, this time, unlike 4 years ago, all early vote, in-person and mail, must be reported by 8 p.m. Eastern time. There were about 3.7 million votes recorded as of yesterday at 5 p.m. It will probably hit 4 million, which is to say 75 to 80% of the total vote will be in by 8 p.m. Eastern.
Wow. Doesn't that strike you as a big number, or is that?
Oh, it's a huge number. Yeah, it's a huge number. In other words, the thing is that Democrats in the modern era run up early vote leads in Georgia, and Republicans take over on election night. We'll know whether or not Georgia is in play as of 8 p.m. Eastern, because we'll have all the early vote data in, and we'll know roughly how many votes are out and how they're distributed between the Democratic counties and the Republican counties. So that's the first thing I'm looking for. Second thing I'm looking for is North Carolina. They close their polls at 7:30. They, too, have extensive early voting. It's about 3.7 million as of today. I believe their early vote goes through 3 p.m. on Saturday in person. Mail can continue to come in, but there's not as much mail as there has been before. Registered Republicans are leading registered Democrats. 2 years ago, over 130,000 more registered Democrats voted early. So that's another good sign. But about a third of the voters there are registered as independents. So again, don't read too much into it. But they don't have a law, but they do tend to report pretty quickly. So by 9 o'clock, I'm expecting we'll have a pretty good sense on North Carolina. This should be, 2/3 to 70% of the total vote. And Trump is ahead in Georgia and North Carolina. He is a huge favorite to win this night.
Right.
He then has 3 different independent paths to 270. He can win Pennsylvania, and he's there. He can win Arizona and Wisconsin, and he's there. Or he can win Nevada and Michigan, and he's there. There are multiple combinations. Pennsylvania gets him there all by himself. There are multiple combinations of the other 5 that get him there. So if he wins those 2 states,
Then she would have to hold the whole blue wall, basically.
Well, she would have to hold the blue wall at that point.
Yeah.
She can't break through in one of those states.
That's
who knows
Pennsylvania,
what's going on.
Michigan,
And you can see the
Wisconsin.
importance of North Carolina in this. In the last 24 hours, Trump has added 2 rallies in North Carolina to his schedule, none in Georgia. Is that because they're worried? Is that because they want to lock it down? Probably a little bit of both. It's better to run worried, and you never want to run scared. Better to run worried than run confidently. But that shows you how important North Carolina is.
Right. We've talked about these 2 districts in Virginia before, the 2nd and the 7th, and you've pointed out that those are sort of 2 bellwethers or things you'll be watching for. What's important about those 2 congressional races?
So Virginia 2 is the Norfolk, Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach area. It is a Biden +2 to +3 seat, significant African-American community, big congressional race going on there. If Harris is doing well with African-Americans, it will show up there. If she's not, because what we find is that there's some state and regional variation in the African-American vote, but not a lot. Mm-hmm. So if there's low turnout and higher Trump percentages in Norfolk, which is a heavy African-American community, there will be elsewhere. And Virginia closes at 7 o'clock, and they report relatively early. The Virginia early vote is showing that, I have not looked at Norfolk, but the number 2 does not have Norfolk. Number 3 has Norfolk. So we want to look at District 3, Bobby Scott's district, for the black vote. There is a black community in there, but the main black vote is in Virginia 3. Virginia 3 early turnout is way down. Mm-hmm. If Trump is running even in that district in Virginia 2, that's a sign that he's going to do better across the rest of the country, because it's a bellwether district. Virginia 7 is a multiracial district in the exurbs of Washington, some rural areas centered on the town of Fredericksburg. Biden won that by a shade under 7. But if Trump is doing if Trump's getting high turnout from his people, and he's doing better among Hispanics and blacks, it will show up there. He probably won't carry the district. If he does, it's going to be a sign of a Republican landslide. But even if he loses it by 4, and the Republican candidate there comes close for Congress, that again is a sign it's a better night for Trump than it is for Harris.
Yeah. Well, Henry, we've got just about a minute left here. I'm going to ask you the question that I'm sure everyone wants to know. Do you have any feelings about who's going to be celebrating on election eve? And follow up to that, do you think we'll know election eve which side should be celebrating?
So I do make predictions hard and fast. I put my head on the chopping block and wait for the guillotine to come down. They will be published this weekend in the New York Post. Read it there. As for do I think we'll know? Yes, I think we'll know by 6 a.m. on Wednesday. The only way we wouldn't know is if it is really, really close in some of these swing states, like if Pennsylvania is within 20,000 votes either way. No, we may not know, because there'll be enough votes left out. But 98% of the vote in Pennsylvania, is counted. Means there's probably not enough votes out for somebody to overtake like a 40,000 vote margin.
Well, Henry, we're going to have to leave it there and read Henry's final prediction. Will be in the New York Post this weekend. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with Henry Olsen. Don't go away. Real Clear Politics will be right back with more after this.
This is Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics
on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. Talking now with J. Peter Zane, who he's the acting editor of Real Clear Investigations. And he writes a column for us a couple times a week a couple times a month. And what's really good about it is it's not predictable. Peter does his own thinking, doesn't repeat talking points. Peter, we had this piece this week by you. Tell our listeners what you were noodling with as 3 or 4 days before the election.
So, I often hesitate to bring psychology into discussions of politics, in part because it's a way of dismissing what people say and believe. On the other hand, psychology and emotion are incredible components of how we understand things. We filter fact and fiction through a lens of both clear-headed analysis, but hopes and fears. And so my piece was basically starting from the standpoint that the idea that Donald Trump is a fascist, or even more so that he is like Hitler or Stalin, is demonstrably false. We have years of evidence of his presidency. We have American political traditions. He's not Hitler. And in fact,
we've never had anyone like that, actually. I mean, Aaron Burr wasn't like that. Who knows what John Wilkes Booth would have done, but you shouldn't. I'll let you continue in a minute, but we just shouldn't even use that. We shouldn't even use those comparisons.
It can't happen here. Well, anything can happen, but it hasn't happened here. And we have enough guardrails in place, and chief amongst which are the goodness of the American people. So something like that wouldn't happen. So in taking a look at the closing argument that Kamala Harris, Democrats, and the Never Trumpers are putting forth, it struck me, one, that they honestly believe this. It is not a political ploy to suggest that Trump is Hitler. This is their bedrock belief. And their bedrock belief is completely unhinged. It has no basis in reality, and yet they are trying to convince us that, in fact, it is the truth. And so what I tried to address is, how does that come about? And you can't understand that without recourse to psychology and emotion, which I think is prevalent on both sides. Although, to take a favorite phrase of the left, I don't think there's a moral equivalency here. I think that the derangement of the left is much more extreme than that on the right. Not that there aren't examples of both on each side, but I think that they're doubling and tripling down on a demonstrably false idea needs attention as to why that is happening.
Well, okay, let me play devil's advocate for a minute. Peter, I liked your column. I edited it, so I'm being a little disingenuous.
You
here.
improved it too. Thank you.
But Susan Glasser is writing in the New Yorker this week, and she was at the Madison Square Garden rally, and she kind of describes it as this festival of hate, that these vile things said about the Democrats, and that these mega Republicans, she was disquieting to her. She was there for the whole rally, and she said, the occasional crudity, they're not overlooking that because they like Trump's policies. The part of the mega movement, the Make America Great movement, sort of revels in this defying of norms and calling people names. She said the loudest roars in the crowd were was the remarks she found the most distasteful, even frightening. So I guess what I'm saying is, it sounds to me like, using your metric, and I think it's right about the left. I think in Trump world, there's a lot of that as well. Kamala Harris is a communist. This will be, they want to do all these terrible things to us. They want to, replace the white race. The litany of stuff. But there are millions of people who on that side who believe this too.
Well, I would note that James Carville and then Hillary Clinton, weeks before this rally, were comparing it to the 1939 fascist rally in Madison Square Garden. I don't know Susan Glasser, but the narrative of this rally before it occurred was that it was a Nazi rally. And then that's how they reported it. I think that the nuance that might be involved there is, you have a group of people who have been smeared and maligned by the powers that be. And let's not forget that the left controls much of the dominant mainstream media. They control much of the levers of power in this country. They set the narrative. And I do think that there's a willingness for many Trump supporters to accept broad language that's inaccurate, but seems to strike back at the negative depictions of them. I'll point you to a Brett Stevens. He's a Never Trumper, used to be at the Wall Street Journal, and now he's at the New York Times. And I didn't include this in my column. I couldn't find a place to put it. But he wrote a closing argument for Kamala Harris piece in the Times a week or two ago. And basically what he said was Donald Trump is the reason that our politics have gone off the rails. So they blame Trump for all of the nasty things that they do, for all of the ways that they have broken the norms. I mean, you want to talk about breaking norms. The Democratic prosecutors who have brought Trump into a court on multiple scurries, even if you think one of the cases is legitimate, what do you say about the other three? What do you say, rule of law? What do you say about their attacks on the Supreme Court merely because the justices ruled in ways that they don't approve? So it's hard to take those claims seriously when, and this is what I'd say has really happened in American politics, there is an absence of principle. And principle is, here are the rules, and I'm going to judge everything on both sides by the same standard. And so, fine, if you want to make an argument about rule of law or normalizing behavior, look at what you're doing as well. And I will also say that, and this is one of the points that I made in the column, I agree, Trump spreads lies and his supporters do as well. But I know many more conservatives who are holding their nose because of Trump and are willing to say, I am not happy about things he's doing. I don't see that on the left. I mean, and just look at the total disappearance of any discussion. Joe Biden is not capable of being president. That seems pretty clear. And yet he is the commander in chief. Kamala Harris was a joke until she was elevated to this standard. And now all of a sudden she should be the leader of the free world.
You're listening to J. Peter Zane, who wrote a column for us this week about the psychological import, the psychology of thinking Donald Trump is a Nazi. And he thinks these people are actually not just using a vile slur, that it's worse than that, they actually believe it. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for Real Clear Politics. You know, when you talk about principle in politics, Peter, I'm thinking, I once interviewed John McCain, and the issue was something less fraught than the things we're talking about now, is the line item veto. And this had been, the Republicans for years had wanted the president to have the line item veto in the budget, to just take things out of the budget that he didn't like to get to a more fiscally responsible thing. The Supreme Court later threw that out and said, Congress can't, abrogate this responsibility. The president had a, stop me before I kill again aspect to it that the court found was unconstitutional. But before that point, by the time it came to be, Bill Clinton was president. And suddenly these people had been working for years for the line item veto. Oh, now they don't want the president to have the line item veto. And McCain was just scratching his head and he said, you know what? We either believe in something or we don't. He was talking about, fiscally conservative mainstream Republicans. We've said that we want this power. And now that this guy's going to use it in a way we don't like, well, we just have to accept that. And we have to win the next election. And I thought, boy, it was such a refreshing view, but not something you find in today's politics very often.
Right. And, and not to say, all politicians are liars or whatever, but I don't expect politicians to be particularly principled because they are in a ultimate partisan zero-sum game. But it's the job of the American people to have principles and to think fairly about these things. And I think that's what's disappeared, on both sides to a great extent.
Actually, Peter, I would push back on that. I don't think that's the job of the American people. I think that's the job of the media. I think our profession is kind of, not fulfilled, has got away from its first principles in this. Once we're partisan, then we make excuses for Kamala Harris if we're on that side that we wouldn't, and I guess the conservative media does the same thing. But to your point, there's much less conservative media than liberal media.
Right. I mean, we can quibble over whether, I would hope that all Americans would just say, I want what's best for the country. And I understand these politicians, are pushing for advantage. And it's my job to sort of say, what's going on and be reasonable about it. But again, what happens is our politics have become so emotional and so tribal. Years ago, I, like a lot of people, were saying, it's kind of like Yankees, Dodgers, Yankees, Red Sox. Well, now it's like Hamas and Israel. There is no giving ground. And I think that is not what we kid ourselves if we think it's because of our clear-eyed understanding of reality. And in fact, we have been overwhelmed by emotion.
You've been listening to Gail Sheehy, a political writer. That's a joke. If you don't get it, Google it. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. This is our last podcast before the weekend, but we'll be back here Monday, which is the day before the election, on the same channel, POTUS channel 124 on Sirius XM Radio, 3 o'clock California, 6 p.m. here in the East. Have a good weekend.
The
Politics
of
the
United
States. This is POTUS on Sirius XM Channel 124.